My name is Quentin Clark. I'm the Director of Program Management for the WinFS project back at Microsoft. I'd like to thank you for coming. I know there's more people trickling in, making noise, crinkling, chips bags, that kind of stuff. We're going to go ahead and get started. I have some good news and I have some bad news for you right away. The good news is, in the next hour plus, you're going to learn a lot about WinFS. Yeah, that's good. Eager. The bad news is, I'm not going to slow down the fire hose that you've been subjected to for the past day and a half. You're going to learn a fair amount about WinFS. I'm going to go through the architecture slide in a fair amount of detail. We're going to show you one demo. But my goal really is to give you the framework or the basis that you need to understand the details about WinFS that you'll learn over the next couple days. So I'm going to take you from between Bill and Jim and Gord's keynotes and bridge you over into the drill down sessions that you'll have in the next couple days. As a result, I'm not going to spend a ton of time in code or demos, but rather give you all the information you need to really understand WinFS and possibly what it even means to you. So to recap the keynotes, there are these major trends happening. More and more data is being born digitally. That's a huge, huge phenomenon. Very, very important to what WinFS is all about. The advent of things like digital photography and video and more and more information like RSS feeds and blogs all coming in has meant that more data is around and coming into your PC and coming onto the desktop. More data is being born digitally in enterprises. More and more IT processes are now online, like expense reports, that kind of thing. And more business-to-business processes are happening through the internet, which means that these paper forms are falling by the wayside more and more every year. Search is also another major trend that's been going on. Search turns out to be a pretty huge problem. Everyone has to memorize these paths to these files instead of just thinking about what their information is. In fact, by some estimates, knowledge workers are spending hours a day just looking for information. Oops, turn this around. Fortunately, there's a couple of technology trends that are helping this. One, there's going to be a place to put all this data. Disk capacity is growing by leaps and bounds. But two, WinFS will be in Longhorn. So what are the user benefits of WinFS? As a Microsoft employee, we've all had this experience of having someone at a party or in line at Starbucks, and they ask you, hey, where you work, you tell them work at Microsoft, and they go, oh, explain to me why I can barely remember something about something I saw on the web 2 months ago, and I go up to one of the search engines and I get the answer back right away. But then I can't seem to find the document I saved my own local hard drive a day ago. Explain to me why this is the case. WinFS is all about providing a model where end-user data will live that completely removes those problems. Users will be able to find information very quickly. Relating is just as important. If I had a woman standing next to me and I said, her name's Melissa, that's information. You'd have some information about that. But then if I said that she's my wife, you'd be like, oh, okay, well I know something more about your life, and I know something more about who you're with most of the time. That relationship implies a lot. Similarly, if we say, oh, you have a meeting at 2 o'clock, you start to ask questions like, where is the meeting? Who's it with? How long is it? What's it about? Are there notes going to be taken? Where will those notes be afterwards? Those are relationships around data. WinFS makes it possible for end users to understand and even make those kinds of relationships. ACT is another important benefit of WinFS from an end user perspective. ACT fundamentally mitigates the fire hose of information that everyone's having to deal with these days. How can the personal computer is it more personal? In other words, it sort of treats everyone's data the same. Why can't you have rules that you can develop as an end user, write as an end user, that gives you the ability to control what information you deal with and how? So end user benefits are interesting to you as developers because it enriches the applications that you build that will be used by somebody in the end. But what are the direct benefits to you as developers? When we talk about WinFS, we like to talk about a crawl, walk, run model. where you can slowly get your feet wet, and as you get deeper and deeper into your investments in WinFS, you can get more and more benefits back out. For example, to start with, WinFS is a file system. In fact, there's a very deep marriage between what we're doing in WinFS and the NTFS technology that we all know today. That marriage has allowed us to support the Win32 API semantics so that you can just have existing file types live within WinFS and start to get the benefits that the end users are going to have with the new user experience in Longhorn built on WinFS. If you're using a standard file format, something that uses OLE doc properties, for example, or one of the media types, those benefits are just there right out of the box. If you have your own custom file format, you can plug into WinFS so that your metadata inside those files also appears in the WinFS query space to enrich the experience that your users have with your application. It didn't make you rewrite any code or abandon the Win32 APIs. Nothing like that had to occur. You just deepened your investment just a little bit into WinFS. Similarly, that same mechanism allows you to plug in code so that as other people come in and program against the APIs that WinFS exposes, the metadata can be put back down into the file streams. We'll talk more about that later. The next step you can take with WinFS is all about leveraging and embracing the Windows types that are there. And I kind of look at this as two sides to one coin. If you're a developer who wants to use a Windows type, give the example of the Amazon application you saw yesterday during Jim's keynote. Amazon's not a contact management, shipping address management app. They simply want to reach into the Windows contact type, pull out an address to ship to somebody, and use that in their application. So for developers that want to enrich their applications with the data that's going to be inside WinFS, the WinFS APIs support a certain platform level ubiquity across these data types. The other side of the coin is, well, what if my application is all about one of these particular types? If my application primarily is about contacts or locations or tasks or photographs. Those ISVs, you as developers that need to really build on those Windows types more deeply, get to extend it and add your own side effects and really embrace and add your uniqueness and your value into those Windows types. The next step you can take is to really build your own unique data types on WinFS. So imagine a world where all sorts of data can be built on this model, and as a result, the end users get these benefits of finding things and relating them and acting on them, and you get to expose yourself in the shell integration in those rich ways. So to demonstrate these developer benefits, I have Toby Whitney, who's one of the group program managers on my team, up here to give that demonstration. Toby?
Hi. Today, I'm going to show you some of the benefits that you get with WinFS and also answer some of the major questions that we've gotten to date. Now, if you went to this morning's keynote, you'll be familiar with some of the things I'm going to show you, but we're going to drill a little bit deeper into some other topics that will help you understand what WinFS is and level the playing surface so that when you go to the other sessions, you know you have a more effective way of asking questions and figuring out what you need to know. Now, when you take the disk that you got in your tote bag, you got a disk of the Longhorn built, and you can install that on a laptop or PC of your own. And when you got that, you saw, or you will see, that there is a default store on the drive that you installed your OS on. Now, if you see that default store, you can get to it by just running at the start menu, whack localhost, whack default store. And that's what I've brought up here. Now, I'm sorry? Right. There you go. Sorry about that. So we've pre-populated the default store with a bunch of data. And as you can see, there are a bunch of current file types inside of the default store. Now, that should in some way be unremarkable, and in a way it should be very remarkable in telling you what you get with WinFS. So you have a bunch of investments, a lot of investments, many of you, inside of the Win32 namespace and NTFS today. And in tomorrow's file system, here are today's file formats. So if I go down as an example of the kind of support you get, here is Windows Media Player 9, getting a file handle, pulling out an MPEG, and running in a video of a bicyclist hitting my client Steve, and we'll talk about that accident later. So that's the comfort level that you should have from the outset with WinFS, that we support the same NTFS file semantics that you're familiar with today, stream handling, namespace resolution, and that your applications are going to work on WinFS when you upgrade to Longhorn or when you put your application on a Longhorn machine. Now, there's a little bit more here. If you look in this view, you can see as I mouse over that the property level data of the data inside of the store is much more highly exposed. And if you went to Bill Gates' keynote yesterday, you saw Hillel Cooperman do a demo of the shell that showed rich property editing and so on. Now, as an example, I can click on this HTML file and I get a different property view than I get today in Windows XP. I can do inline editing of properties and other rich functionality that you don't get in Windows XP. So that's the second thing you benefit from when you upgrade from the get-go. If you use file formats that Windows supports today that are standard, so say image files that use the EXIF header, or document types that use the OLE doc properties, we'll use by default the metadata handler infrastructure inside of WinFS to put your document properties inside of WinFS and allow you to query across them and get that rich benefit. So from the get-go, the first thing people ask, what's going to happen? Your applications are going to work because we still support the NTFS semantics that you use today. The second thing is, if you use standard file formats, your users are going to get a big user experience improvement. So once you understand that the NTFS semantics are still there and your applications will run, what people want to know is, what does the surface area of WinFS look like? You have all these notions of schemas, a data model, and so on. What does the surface area of that thing look like? What does that data structure have for me? So here's the object browser, and I've loaded the system.storage DLL and the system.storage.schemas DLL. And you can see when I expand the system.storage schemas DLL that with those schemas, those XML declarative schemas that we're creating up in Redmond, and some of which you'll be able to write yourself for your own data types, we turn those into namespaces, and from those namespaces, each of the schemas has a bunch of types inside of it. And with each of those types, we go and we create assemblies or classes, and those classes have methods on them that you'll see in the right-hand panel. So, for instance, here's annotation, and you can see there are methods on the right-hand side. Now, there are three different types of objects that we've created here. The first type of object are system objects. And underneath the system.storage schema, you'll see that we have the things that make up the guts of WinFS. So for instance, you're going to hear an awful lot about items. WinFS is all about items, and we're going to tell you a lot about what items are, what they do, and so on in the sessions following and in Quentin's talk. So here we define what items are, and you can see that there are methods on the right side, and then here's the property of what an item is. Created date, a display name, and so on. You also can see here that we have a type that is a nested type or nested element, a second big building block of WinFS. We also have links, which are a third big building block, which we talk about a lot, often using the word relationships. And the fourth thing, which we're going to demonstrate in about 5 minutes, is the extensions. And we'll talk about what an extension is and how you can use it. So that's what the system schemas do. The second type of schemas that we have are application level schemas. And the best example of an application level schema would be a help schema. And the help schema in Windows, inside of the help schema in Windows, you're going to see all of the help files that users want. And you'll also be able to store the help files for your application in there too. So here's the help schema, and I can open it up, and when I click on one of the classes, I can see the properties in that class. So those are the building blocks that you get to work with, but where's the end user data? Well, that's what we spend a lot of time on also. And you'll see that we have end user data schemas like audio, that have things like playlists, that have properties like who the author of the playlist is, what the genre of the music of the playlist is. And we also have other kinds of end user schemas like contact, and document. And there are altogether now about 30 objects that we've created, and we expect there to be about 45 when we're done. Now, it's good to have this kind of general surface area here, and you see that there's kind of a playground for you to deal with, but how do you actually get the data in and out of WinFS? There's a lot of time that we're going to spend about how we are putting relational technologies on top of NTFS, how we're putting object-oriented technologies on top of NTFS. And if you're not a database person and you don't know T-SQL by heart, and that's not what you dream about, you may want to know, how much am I going to have to learn to take advantage of this system? Well, we have a sample that we've shipped in the Longhorn SDK that I'm going to open up, and we're going to dive into that a little bit. So the sample that I'm going to load up is the item searcher sample, and it's a pretty straightforward small piece of code that goes and pulls all of the contacts that are in your WinFS store. We gave you a little sample to populate some contacts with so you could run this. And it's pretty straightforward. We create a class. We go and we look for, we create a person searcher, so we're looking for all the people. We're sorting by city. What the interesting part here is that sort. Sort option, display name, sort order, descending. So inside of managed code, you're creating and using you're using a SQL-like operator. And that's kind of the big news. You're not embedding a SQL statement here. You don't need to know what an index is. You don't have to do your own joins. You don't have to figure out what a view is or projection or any of those other SQL technologies. You can get the value out of WinFS and pull data out that you want to use, manipulate, and operate over using your managed code, using Visual Studio. Now, how do we do that? Well, we're making a big investment in a technology called OPath. And OPath is our mapping of managed code operators onto SQL operators so that you can use SQL operators through managed code without having to bring up SQL itself. Yes. Where's the font manipulator in Visual Studio? I use Slick Edit. This is what happens when you use Slick Edit and you don't use the company's product. You guys want it larger than that? Better? Unfortunately, we're just about to lose context off of this. So you can see here, so I'll bring it up again. You can see here that there's a searcher that you're trying to get people out of the store, and that here's your sort option by display name and your sort order. So if you go into the Longhorn SDK and you search for OPath, you'll see that there's this operators and keywords table. And in that operators and keywords table, you can see that there are some baseline operators that we've put in your Longhorn SDK today that you can use today, like logical ands, logical ors, equality, and we're going to put in more sophisticated SQL operators that you'd expect, like group by. So that's how you can get data out of the store. You don't have to go learn T-SQL to do it. Now, once you've got the ability to understand what the surface area of WinFS is in terms of its data structure, and you can feel like you can get data in and out of it pretty easily, the thing you want to do is really go out and kind of solve your business problem. So solving your business problem usually means extending the system so that you can search for data that's interesting to your business and your users. And before you create a new type or a new extension, you're going to want to go and look and see what's there today. Now, in our scenario about legal documents and legal cases and legal information, you're going to want to go and look and see what's there today. So a lot of the stuff that we use inside of our law firm now are basically documents, word processing documents and Excel spreadsheets. So I'm going to go into document, which is inside of the core namespace. And you'll see that on the right-hand side, there are a bunch of generic doc properties that look pretty interesting. Searching by authors you could do. This exists today. A preview of what the document is, a GIF of what the first page of the document is, the size of it. But these are generic properties. And you're going to want to do things beyond just go do the generic properties that we're providing with you in Windows. So if I'm in my law firm, I have my own business problem to solve. So let's say that that bicycle accident you saw earlier, that guy who got hit, his name's Steve. And Steve didn't get hurt, but he sure is angry and he wants to sue. It's very typical. But in my firm, I haven't gone and done anything with Longhorn except for upgrade it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my law firm go and create its own schema. And those types are pretty easy to create. And let's go look at what that XML is. So the declarative syntax for creating a extension or an item or relationship is pretty straightforward. Here's your schema namespace. You reference some schemas that you'll subtype in your schema as you choose. And you'll see here that my law firm wants to create a extension called a legal case. So you declare the name, and you can tell it's an extension because it derives off of base.extension, extension that is a class inside of the system.storage schema that I showed you earlier. Now, once you've created your extension name, you actually want to go create some fields. Now, the field declarations are also pretty simple. Now, client number. This kind of schema with a client number and maybe a jurisdiction and a judge name isn't the kind of thing that we're going to put inside of Windows. We're going to build you a base data structure that you can then extend yourself. And we expect the vast majority of you to create your own items and to create your own extensions. So on the field name, there's client number. And you can see that it's just an nvarchar, a straight data type. And you declare whether it's nullable or true or multi-valued, whether you can have multiple case numbers attached to a case. And then you can go down and see that there are other properties. Settlement amount is an example, with the type of money and whether it's nullable and multi-valued. Now, let's talk about the fact that this is an extension. Once you upgraded your machines to Longhorn and you started populating data into the default store, those files that you used to use are now what we call items. And an extension that you declare can be attached to any item type in the system. So whether it's an MPEG, a JPEG, a PDF, a document of any type, any other item that you create on your own, and this extension can be on it. So now that we've upgraded all of our machines to Longhorn in the law office, and we've created these extensions and we're attaching them to all the data associated to cases, let's go take a look at what you get. So this is the same view of the shell, but the data's been extended. And the problem I want to solve is that my friend Steve has been hit, needs me to write a summons to bring our friend to court, our bicyclist. And I don't want to write one from scratch. I want to reuse data, and I want to go find a summons that I wrote about a couple of years ago that will give me a document that I can edit very quickly, reuse, and resave. So what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to start sorting on data that you're familiar with. So first I'm going to do is use the word wheel feature inside of the shell and type in summons, and it narrows down my result set to all the documents that just have summons in the title. And that's great stuff. Now, that's fine. Now, I also know that I created this summons that I want to reuse about 2 years ago. So I'm going to add create date, and I'm going to sort by all the create dates that are there, 2001, and this brings me down to 3 files. Now, I don't want to have to open these things and search on them just to find out the one I want. The one I want had a settlement of about $1.5 million. So I'm going to go and I'm going to change the view to details, and it's just going to turn into a list view. And then once that happens, I'm going to go choose the other details that are now available to me because they're declared properties on the extension on all these documents. So you can see here are my legal case properties, a long list of them. So here's case name, case number, literature number, and settlement amount. So I'm going to add settlement amount, and because I can program the shell to an extent, and you can go talk to the shell folks about how you do that, I now can add case name. Did I add case name? I have case name, and I have an unexpandable window. Yeah. So it's falling off the screen. But I can sort now by all the data that I choose to on the shell, And I can also program the shell so that I can have different views on my data. You can see here there's all legal documents, all wills. And when I sort by all legal documents, I can go and then start sorting by all the data that is germane to my firm. Now that's the value of WinFS. You could have never done this in Windows XP. You can install new types that fit your business and search through them on the shell as you choose, and also use the same APIs that the shell does to put them inside your application. So that's WinFS. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. So now that I've introduced you, talked about the benefits from both a user and a developer perspective, and showed you those developer benefits in action, we spent a couple of slides talking about what WinFS is and what it is not. WinFS is a place where all end user data will live in Longhorn. When you upgrade an XP machine to Longhorn, we will be picking up end user data that we find and putting it in the WinFS store that gets installed. Along with that comes this whole new user experience. You saw the demo that Hillel gave, and there's more on that detail at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at Hillel's overview talk on the new shell experience. WinFS is a trustworthy place to store data. We have, fortunately, the full bearing of the CLR and framework security models, as well as the NTFS model, on the problem of making sure that WinFS is a secure place to store data. WinFS is, in fact, using relational engine technology. We are a marriage between NTFS, the relational engine, and, in fact, the CLR in order to achieve the goals that WinFS has for storing data in this rich way. Everyday information will have types in WinFS. Windows Longhorn will come with, as Toby demonstrated, a set of schemas that describe everyday things like a contact or a location or a task, etc. And WinFS also has this set of services which make the data more than just being stored somewhere, but really allow you to make the data more active. Just as importantly is what WinFS is not. We are not abandoning legacy applications. We believe that continuity is very important, and you've probably seen that throughout whether we've been talking about what we're doing in Avalon and it's bridging back to WinForms, or we've been doing in Indigo and it's bridging back to other networking technologies. We're not forcing the world to rewrite everything. As we've described, you'll be able to get benefits even from your existing file formats. And it is certainly not complete yet. What you have in your backpacks or whatever it is that we gave you, this PDC, the build that's inside there really is a preview. And we're really excited to have given you this preview build because we get to get feedback much earlier than a beta would have. But the model is not complete. When you get beta 1, the fundamental model of WinFS, the data model, will be done. And when you get beta 2, the platform will be complete and the user experience will be complete as well. And it is not just a database. So while it's true that the company, Microsoft, has a set of relational assets that we're using for Yukon and for WinFS, WinFS really is pulling technologies together from CLR, from NTFS, from SharePoint, etc., in order to build WinFS. And it is not the sum of every blog rumor you've ever read. So believe what you hear from us, not what you hear from any random person with an opinion. So let me take Jim's slide, pull out and blow up the WinFS section. Over the next remaining set of the presentation, I'm going to go through each one of these boxes in a little bit more detail to describe to you what all this stuff means and how WinFS is actually put together. Let's start with the data model. WinFS is all about items. And if you don't walk away from the PDC remembering anything else about WinFS, remember this. There's this thing, items. Items are what files were. Items are what rows were. Items are the thing that you're going to deal with primarily. It's the atomic unit of data that you pick up, that you copy, that you program to, that you relate to, that you define. It's fundamentally all about items. A WinFS item allows you to have scalar as well as complex types, as well as XML, as well as opaque things like a binary file stream, supported all within this notion of an item. Items, in fact, are persisted. So WinFS is a store. You can create these item objects, save them in the database. Relationships are the next key concept in the data model. And relationships are actually a variety of different things. You can think of relationships as the way you can physically organize things. I've taken a folder and I've put this item in this folder. Or explicit relationships, such as I have a contact and I have a document and there's an author relationship between those two items. But there are also implicit things, like all the documents that were authored by people in this group that were changed since last week. So relationships are pervasive throughout the system, and in fact it's the power of relationships that really bring the WinFS model into a different place. And it's about extensions. At every place in the system, every place in the data model, there's a way for you as developers to come in and extend those systems so that you can add your own unique value. What were the data model goals we had when we built the data model? First of all, we had a lot of things to deal with. We had a very complex world around us that we had to really understand. There are things like OLE documents and mechanisms like attaching a document into a mail message that we had to be able to model. We had to provide you the ability to be very flexible about how you could construct the data that you cared about. That flexibility appears all over the place, not just in our extension model, but also in data constructs. So for example, our notion of foldering allows you to take an item and put it in multiple folders. While NTFS does have the notion of holding a holding link or a hard link, this goes beyond that and is actually a much richer data model that gives you flexibility in how you can let users view and interact with the data that you have in the system. So the data model had to look at the best of what's in NTFS, look at the best of what's existing in the relational world, target towards solving these end user problems of searching and finding and relating and acting on information and solve a data model, build a data model that solves those goals. That's the thing that you really need to learn about in Patrick Thompson's talk, which is tomorrow. But the data model is something fundamentally new. The data model is built around schemas. In fact, as Patrick would say, it's all about schemas. The rest of it's all incidental to the WinFS model. Schemas include things that we're going to build into Windows, such as contacts or calendars, media, documents, user tasks, etc. They also include things that are very system-focused, as Toby was just describing, like help. But more importantly, you also get to develop your own schemas. This is where we're really going beyond what it's just about to be a file system. WinFS is not just a new file system. It is, in fact, a data model that you get to use to model the data that you have in your applications in the way that you want to in order to be both productive and to provide good end user benefits. Schemas can be comprised of a bunch of different things. I talked a little bit about scalars and complex types, etc. But the other way we look at this is data can be structured, semi-structured, or non-structured. So you can have things like very strongly typed data, XML bodies of things like a document, and also unstructured data that never will be structured. For example, the actual series of ones and zeros that make up the image of a JPEG will never really be structured data. So all three of those had to be part of how you can model a schema. Let me give you an example of what you do with schemas. So here we have an example schema which defines person. Now this is an incredibly simplified example and is not the actual person schema in WinFS. But you can see I've derived it from a base type. I have a couple of properties. I have a relationship defined. And I also have this property that's of a file stream type. Okay, so I have structured data, I have opaque data, and I have a relationship defined as what it means to be this person item. When you feed a schema into WinFS, we generate two things. One is about how we store it, and the other is about how you program to it. So we generate a partially implemented class. This is a new feature in the Whidbey version of the CLR and the .NET framework to build partial classes, which you can then combine code together in order to fully implement a class. So based on the schema, we automatically generate code so you can program to that schema right away. Now you as developers will want to inject your own value, business logic, etc. into these schemas so that the items behave like you need them to. And we also generate the physical layout. And we'll go into details of that over the next months, but we take the schema, figure out the best way to optimize storing that inside the relational model, and set up all those structures for you automatically. We also generate views so that you can get into it through things like a T-SQL statement to get at the data and look at it as though we're just relational data. Now let's talk about the APIs. One of the big struggles around building integrated storage is there is no single right answer. You have to be able to support things like a file stream. Toby showed you in this demonstration, he took a video clip and he showed the streaming support that we have because we're so well integrated with NTFS. Well, okay, so you have to have file streams. You have to have file handles. You have to have that capability. Other demos can show you things like using XML and the ability to do queries inside items that have XML parts and understand the semi-structured data within items. So you have to have that notion. You have to be able to store XML and understand it and use it. And of course, the whole platform is about developer productivity. And the way we're working on this, of course, is through WinFS, the whole managed code platform. So there has to be a set of objects that you can easily explore and program to with all the benefits you typically get out of Visual Studio, like IntelliSense, etc. So you have to have objects too. Many integrated storage efforts over the years have kind of not gotten this correctly. They've really focused on one thing or another and not allowed the flexibility at the programming interfaces to allow the developers to get the power out of the system the way they need to. So WinFS does have objects. As I said in the previous slide, all the schemas are associated to a class, to a manifest, and you can program against objects for those data types. There are views, and you can write T-SQL statements against those views. And you can literally select columns and data back out of those views in a very traditional relational way. And there's also XML. XML is incredibly important to the company for a lot of reasons. One, it does give us this great semi-structured story, and also gives us this great interoperability. Fundamentally, part of Indigo is about this message-based programming experience, and the messages really make the most sense to send around as XML. So with WinFS, you'll be able to reach in, identify an item, get it back as XML, do interoperability with it through web services or through other consumers of XML. Just give a couple of examples. Here's a VB managed API example for finding all people in the system whose last name is Smith. So you can see it's a fairly simple object API example. We create a variable person item. We do a find all method on the search on the person itself, and we get back this collection of persons, and we can iterate through those and do whatever we need to do with it. I can also do this through T-SQL. So you can see I have a select statement, and you can see I have select star, and I'm again selecting in that last name and finding all the results that match, all the people that match having that last name. So you can go through this from both angles and get back the same results back. So now let me go through some of the services. I'm hoping by this point, through the various keynotes and through what I've said and what Toby said, you guys get that we're supporting the Win32 APIs. Is anyone confused about that? No? In fact, I had someone come up to me right before the talk and say, you know, I'm a little worried because you're hammering home this, you are a file system point pretty hard. Are people understanding that you're more than just that? You actually have this rich data model. So I think we've made it pretty clear that we have to support these file system semantics. And there's this notion, this idea called file-backed items in WinFS. Any item in WinFS, well, actually select items in WinFS in the schemas can be file-backed. So things like documents or audio tracks or media clips, etc., all can be file-backed and can be associated to a real NTFS file stream that gets a real NTFS file handle associated with it. Now, when you program to these objects, we're careful to ensure that we have data integrity. So we're using the capabilities of the transactional NTFS file system to ensure that we can take the file stream changes as well as the structured changes and make them all at once. Files can live still in NTFS. So one of the statements I made before was we're taking all the end user information, we're migrating it into WinFS store when you upgrade from XP to Longhorn. So the My Documents, the My Videos, the My Music, the My whatever, that user experience is all built and based around WinFS. Now NTFS is still there. It's still there under the covers and it's still there in reality. C:/Windows, that directory, C:/program files, all that stuff is still in fact in NTFS. And you can continue to store data in NTFS if your application really calls for that. Items also can live solely in WinFS. They can't live in both places at once. When I say we're integrated with NTFS, it's sort of like saying an engine's integrated with a car. Well, a car's not very useful without the engine. The coupling we have between NTFS and WinFS is very deep, and such that when you address items in WinFS that have file stream parts, we are storing them. WinFS is the storage system for that. These file-backed items are all accessible through the Win32 APIs. So yes, things like create file, the actual create file API does work. And like I said before, we are taking all user data and moving it in. Operations. It turns out that operations are an incredibly important part of what WinFS is all about. So is security management, ensuring that the system is secure and the data is secure and allowing end users to deal and manage that security is of utmost importance. So we have to have the tools and the systems available in order to ensure that that's the case. Manageability is this huge deal. Like I said before, we're taking a set of relational assets and we're using them to marry in and build the WinFS system. As you can imagine, some of those relational assets come with relational people. There's literally people working on WinFS that are used to building these data systems. And I tell them things like, there will be a 0 to 200 million DBA to user ratio. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. The system has to be completely self-managing. End users will not be able to make changes to optimize indices or do compression on the B trees or whatever else. Has to be completely self-managing. So this operations notion is about ensuring that WinFS is this great component with all the right basics. Jim talked a lot about the fundamentals. Well, it's about making sure the fundamentals are there in WinFS from day one. This includes things like backup and restore. Not only will you get sort of what you expect out of NTFS today in terms of backup and restore, WinFS has this item level backup and restore. So you'll be able to retrieve particular items. That's related to time warp and snapshot, where the OS is keeping track of what changes have been made and can roll back the clock, if you will, and bring back the desktop back to a previous state. Things like application install need to be flawless. So we've been describing, Gord went through the extensibility points, and I'll in fact go through them again at the end of this presentation. But there's all these things you can do to interact with WinFS. You can provide these metadata handlers to help with the metadata in the files types. You can build preference rules to hook into InfoAgent. You can build synchronization adapters. You can build your own types. We have to ensure that you as an application have a good framework that you can set up all your WinFS needs in a cohesive way. We have to support additional things like antivirus and quota management and importing, exporting things out of the store. Even stuff like the emergency recovery console. When you take an XP disk and you stick it in and you boot off it, you get this recovery console. We have to be able to support those same kinds of things. So I want to just say that WinFS is being designed from the beginning to ensure that we have these great sort of operations experiences with the store. So let me talk about services that WinFS provides, and we'll start with synchronization. Fundamentally, we believe in this model where data lives somewhere, and because of that, and you can synchronize data in, you can get data into one place, and you can build relationships on it, and you can extend it, that there's a lot of value in that model. In fact, most usages will have all that data living on the client. Some usages will want to run off the server and have a WinFS store out on the network, and that's fine too. But fundamentally, we believe that data does belong in one place, so it can be related, and it can be searched, and it can be understood and explored by users. Synchronization is the component that allows that to actually happen. WinFS Sync itself will allow for great peer-to-peer, peer-to-server, or sorry, client-to-server, and client-to-service kinds of scenarios. We'll support WinFS to WinFS Sync for Longhorn, which will allow you to have this rich synchronization experience. The shell will be exposing this notion of synchronization groups so that you can set up a group of people and a set of items that you want to have distributed across that set of people through synchronization. As an ISV, as a developer, you can build synchronization adapters so you can get data in from other sources. And that's bidirectional. You can also recognize changes. The infrastructure is there in synchronization to allow you to efficiently get data changes sent back out. And also, there's this notion of conflicts. And I'll describe this a bit in the next slide, but we also want to allow developers to add intelligence around how do you deal with conflicts that occur when changes might overlap each other. So let's talk a little bit about the approach that synchronization takes. It's inherently multi-master. There are many, many ways to do synchronization. Merged, transactional, action-based, etc. And we've actually worked with MS Research to develop a multi-master synchronization model that we believe will work well with the WinFS data model and very well for the scenarios that we're trying to support. It is multi-master net change synchronization. WinFS Sync itself provides a set of common services that you can build upon for synchronization adapters you might need, such as change tracking, change enumeration, conflict handling, etc. You can hook in very deeply into the system to efficiently handle synchronization inside WinFS. Synchronization uses the schemas as the first line of defense around conflicts. So inside the schemas, there's this notion of change units. And certain change units make sense together. For example, you might take the begin time and end time of a meeting and declare that as a change unit. It doesn't make sense to change one without the other. You need to make sure that both of those are kept together as one atomic unit. Other changes, like the title of a meeting or the subject of a meeting, don't need to be changed in the context of some other piece of metadata, so that's its own separate change unit. Inside the WinFS schemas, you can define what these change units are so that items that are changed independently as they come together, as long as those change units don't conflict, they get merged in together seamlessly. If you do end up with a conflict, of course WinFS will have a set of conflict handlers that you can set up through policy. So for example, you could say, last writer wins. But you can also inject some code into the system that says, I know best how to deal with when a meeting subject conflicts, and I'll take care of that. You can also, of course, build synchronization adapters. And again, WinFS has to provide this rich set of services so that you can efficiently build these adapters. The last service is InfoAgent. And Gord talked about, and there's been a couple of demos of various InfoAgent scenarios, so I won't go into that too much. But it enables end users to do things like, hey, when I get a phone call from a high priority customer and I'm not at my desk, I want them to know that I'm going to get back to them. Or it allows you to do things like, hey, I'm getting all these RSS feeds, but what I'm really interested in is the following topic. Whenever something new comes in about that, I want you to pop that up as a piece of toast if I happen to be working at my desktop. Fundamentally, this is about letting users make their PCs more personal. It's about letting users have control over how the data is coming in. Beginning of the talk, I talked about this explosion of digitally born data. And the hard drives are getting bigger, fortunately, so there's a place to put it. And the WinFS model is getting richer, so more and more data can be there and can be structured and can be around. Synchronization's there to get more and more data in. How are you end users going to deal with all this information? Well, it's through this InfoAgent platform, and it's through how you as developers inform that. So as a developer, you get to say things like, I'm going to create schemas that are relevant to how data is seen by the system as it's coming in. Or I get to provide contexts that are relevant to how rules are processed. So one of the ones we're going to build into Windows is the full screen mode context. And right now I'm in full screen mode. I don't want the fact that I have IM buddies coming online to pop up in front of you all. So that's one of the ones that we're going to build in. But you get to provide your own context as well. And then the other one, of course, is actions. We'll have some default built-in actions. Send a message, send an email, put up a piece of toast, this notification, that kind of thing. But you also get to set up actions as well. So you get to both augment the user experience platform around creating these preferences and how this data is dealt with. You also get to use it as a platform, as a rules engine yourself, so that you can dynamically deal with data that's coming in and out of the system programmatically. So now let me talk about extending the WinFS technology. This should really recap what you've heard throughout the talk. And I wanted to end on time, and I'm actually doing pretty good, so we can take questions, because I know that every time we talk about WinFS in less than 5 hours, we get a lot of questions. So extensibility points. First of all, there are Windows types. You can use them, you can embrace them. I want to re-hit the point that there's two ways you can look at Windows types, or any type in the system, in fact. One way is you can say, hey, I've got this ubiquitous platform that a contact is a contact is a contact, and if I want to pull out something like a shipping address, I can just pull out an address, and I can write that managed code, and I get to integrate with these Windows types, and life is really good. The other way you can look at it is to say, hey, I'm all about contacts. I need to add my extensions, my value add, my side effects, my business logic, and that too will be possible for the instances of those items that you own. Second, you can build your own types. This is a very rich data model. Get excited about this. You don't have to be a 20-year PhD database nerd in order to get value out of data. You can simply define the shape of your data, feed it to WinFS, start to work with the partial classes, and get rolling very quickly. And this storage platform has all these benefits around synchronization and InfoAgent operations that just come when you define a type. You have to do nothing else. You get all those benefits effectively for free just by defining your own types. Third, with the existing file types, you get to use them. And you get to build metadata handlers that ensure that the properties that you care about are appearing in the WinFS model, and that when those APIs are programmed to, those properties get pushed back down into the API, down into the file streams themselves. Fourth, build on InfoAgent. Really ask yourself the question, gosh, what does it mean for my end users to field data of my types? What does it mean for them if I'm a personal finance app and I've created the check type? Gosh, what kinds of things will users want to control about checks that are coming into the system or check items that are coming into the system? Think hard about that and inform InfoAgent about the kinds of things that users can do. And also use it as a platform to make your data more active. Build on sync. In fact, one of the things I like to say is WinFS with synchronization allows you to build distributed applications without building distributed. Right? Think about it this way. You get to build your application, rely on synchronization to go across nodes. You get to use our notifications and InfoAgent to allow your application to react to changes in data, and you never once thought about the wire. You never once opened a port. You get those benefits just out of building on WinFS. And of course, integrating with other data sources. The data sources you have back in your corporations, if you're an IT developer, the data sources that your application works with as an app developer. And six, embrace the shell model and build on the shell model. The shell team, which we've been working with very deeply in the past couple years, has really embraced this notion of it's not good enough just to have our own generic Windows Longhorn default views. We have to allow developers to deeply integrate and extend and build their experiences directly into the Windows shell. So you learn all about that in Hillel's talk, and also a talk by Nat Ballou that happens, I'm not exactly sure when, it's on the slide at the end. But really understand that shell model, and when you define WinFS items or extend the WinFS items that are there, or even have just the file types, you'll be able to integrate and have some control and be part of that whole shell experience. So what does this mean? If it's not already clear, WinFS is a big deal. Okay? Longhorn is very near and dear to our hearts. Longhorn is fundamentally about offering this new set of opportunities and capabilities for you as developers to innovate on. In some ways, I think Jim showed this explicitly in his slides. He talks about DOS to Win16 to Win32 to WinFX. We really believe that. We really believe that there will be applications built on Longhorn that just aren't even possible today. WinFS is one of the three core pillars of this WinFX platform. There's Indigo for communication, there's WinFS for data, and there's Avalon for presentation. So WinFS is going to be a huge part of your lives as you start to get your heads around the new Longhorn ecosystem. But also know that you don't have to be a big data nerd in order to get and take advantage of WinFS. In fact, it's a primary goal of ours, just as managed code has raised the bar significantly on productivity, and as Indigo will raise the bar significantly on productivity. WinFS 2 will raise the bar significantly on productivity around data. There's a data model in Windows. You can rely on it being there. You can take advantage of it. There are these new Windows types you can leverage and use in your applications to do things that just aren't even possible today. WinFS exposes the data, how users want to deal with it. Users don't want to think things like, okay, my notes from this session is C:/documents and settings / Quentin C / my documents / PDC notes / CLI 201 notes.doc. No one wants to memorize that. Instead, I'd like to be able to go into Nui and saying, find me the notes from the WinFS session at the PDC. Boom, the answer comes back. Or even by going through the stacking metaphor or the relationships metaphor. Gee, show me the PDC, show me the notes about WinFS, here you go. Or show me all the notes I've taken at conferences, stacked by what topic they were on, or stacked by what conference they were in, and boom, you get those answers back. It's about the managed code. Managed code is about the productivity, about the robustness, about the next generation of the platform. It really is a significant leap forward that's backwards compatible. We've made the point a billion times by this point. You really can use existing file types, but you really can go much further. And by going much further, you get so much more out of the system. By deepening your investments, you deepen your returns. In fact, I believe you deepen your returns geometrically. So what else are we doing with PDC? A bunch of talks. In fact, right after this one, there was a talk on the APIs, the first API talk, which is upstairs, given by John Ludeman. And there's a whole bunch of talks that go through what WinFS is all about. I'll leave the slide up here after I'm done. There's a panel called Client Architecture, the Zen of Data-Driven Applications. Jeremy Masner, if you're here, you take a bow for inventing those words. But we're going to get together with a couple of folks to talk about what building data-driven applications is all about. I made this assertion during this talk that data can be active. The data doesn't have to just be this static thing that's reposited someplace. But you really can build applications around the notion that data can be active. Come find out about that. Of course, we have the news group, which you've seen and some of you have, in fact, posted to. And also know that it's not the final build. As we get further down the road, we'll have more and more details coming out. Also want to say the following. Because WinFX and WinFS, as a part of that, are these big new innovations for developers, We've given this preview release, we've done the PDC, and we've done all this so early because we want your feedback. I can't stress this enough. In fact, we have Shashir here somewhere. I don't know where he is exactly, but we're setting up these focus groups where we're going to actually sit down with you, with the WinFS team, and talk about various topics and get details about what you think about what you've been hearing. So you can come talk to us after the session, but you can visit our booth to sign up for these focus groups. And I think you can also sign up somewhere here, either up here or in the back of the room. So without further ado, I'm going to leave this up so you can look at those sessions, and then we'll take questions. And don't forget to go up to the mics, because we're getting yelled at for not making you do that. Thanks.
Hello?
Where are you?
Right here. Oh, to your right.
Here.
All right, somewhere over there I can't see.
Hi. I've
Hi.
got two questions. The first is WinFS going to become the data store for Outlook locally and replace the OST file? Because it seems like it doesn't really make sense for Outlook to not use WinFS as its data store.
Yeah, you can clap to that if you want. While I agree with you, here's what I have to say about that. Outlook, the entire Office team just got done with the Office 2003 release. I mean, literally, they just finished it up. You know, and some of them are wandering back from their ship parties, all still fuzzy and stuff. Long cycle for them.
So after a long weekend, they'll be ready to...
Yeah, and we're just now beginning the planning around what Office 12 is really going to be all about. So certainly, what Outlook's role is in populating the WinFS store is a hot topic. I can't commit that that's what we're going to do because we're really just starting those discussions and starting that planning. But that's certainly something that we think is really important.
Well, I guess if you didn't do that, you'd have to synchronize everything in Outlook with WinFS if you want to be able to do all this cool stuff, right?
Yeah, I think it's a really important scenario. We're just not far enough in planning to make that promise yet.
Okay. My second question is, if you go through WinFS to create user data, do you make a choice at that point as to whether or not it's file-backed data or not? And is the only reason to make something file-backed to make it backwards compatible with old generation applications, or? Yeah,
that's a good question. So to recap that question, when and how should you use file-backed items? The notion of something having a file stream part. There's a couple of reasons. One, yeah, if you do want to allow other applications to come in and see that thing through the Win32 APIs and get that file stream out, then yeah, define your item as having a file stream part so that it can be file backed. The other way to look at this is there really are still needs for streaming data. And using a file stream part really is the best way to achieve that, because you get all the benefits of the years of work we've done on doing really good streaming support in NTFS. So by defining your item as having a file stream part, irregardless of if you think it'll be used to the Win32 APIs, you still get that rich file streaming behavior that NTFS supports.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I can't see, so just step on each other.
Okay, sir.
Yep.
Could you speak to the role of versions and versioning in conflict and conflict detection? You mentioned in the synchronization section about detecting and resolving conflict.
Yep.
And versioning and schema and versioning the instances of the items. Kind of what's the stance? What's going forward? I'm not really happy about seeing major version type equals 1 in every line of every field of every schema is about
Yeah, so there really is basically no versioning support in what you have in the PDC builds today, so you're not seeing any of the work we've been doing there. When we roll out with Beta 1, we will have the versioning support implemented, and you'll be able to see that there. Versioning is a big challenge to get right, and we're taking our time to really carefully ensure the design is correct. We have to deal with things like, we ship Windows, we decide that we got some part of contact, not necessarily wrong, we want to do something different with it. We want to increment the version of it without having to ship a whole new version of Windows. We need to be able to pull old versions of instances of the data in that type into the new format. So there's a whole versioning semantics and messages and tools that we just haven't completed for the PDC, but we're working on it, in fact, right now.
Is scale a concern there? I mean, what you've described is a death of 1,000 cuts when schemas are very fine-grained. So this needs to be something that is powerful in the sense that I should not have to write a handler
Yeah,
for every
absolutely.
little change.
Absolutely. That's why we're trying to bake it into the system. If you want to talk more about versioning, and we'd love to hear your feedback on it, Toby Whitney will be at AX. Not, you don't ax the experts. You ask the experts. But he'll be at the session tonight, and you can talk to him. He'd be glad to brainstorm with you about it. Yeah.
3 questions. The first is, do you plan to integrate the registry into WinFS? The second is, it is possible that one WinFS system spans multiple drives or partitions? And the third is, do you think about also to integrate CD-ROM and DVD systems and alternatives to NTFS? I think a lot of persons have stored documents on read-only file systems.
Okay, I forgot your first question. What was it?
The first was a registry.
Registry, all right. Yeah, so before I talked about our primary goal in Longhorn is to get end-user data in WinFS. The registry is not end-user data. It's application and OS configuration. There's a long-term goal to actually build all the metadata around Windows on WinFS. But our goal in Longhorn is really about end-user data. So we're not taking the registry and just porting it over and trying to make it work on WinFS in Longhorn. We will tackle that at a later time. Your second question was about whether or not a single WinFS store can span more than one partition. And we haven't worked out the user system of how that would work, but the technical answer is yes. So one of the things we'd love to be able to do, and this isn't a promise, this is a brainstorm, okay, I'm going to caveat it appropriately. One of the things we'd love to be able to do in Longhorn is recognize when you've cracked open your PC, dropped in a new internal ID hard drive, and recognize that's an internal drive and automatically just expand the WinFS store as opposed to making users now make decisions, oh, do I want to put that on D: or C: or whatever. So yeah, we technically can do it. We're just trying to work through what the right user experience is around that. Your third question was?
CD-ROM and DVD systems.
Yeah, sorry. I've been doing this now for a long time. There's a lot of data that's in stores that are not WinFS. You know, whether they're key fobs or DVD-ROMs with picture libraries, whatever that stuff is. And we have mechanisms within WinFS to effectively allow you to create items which reference other entities that live outside the WinFS store. And we're trying to work through what the user experience should be around that capability. So this is a great discussion to have with guys from the Windows user experience team. Hillel and Chris Guzak, who's here, and a bunch of other guys. Because we're really trying to figure out what the right thing to do there is and how much depth and richness they want on those other kinds of file formats.
Thanks.
Yep.
Question?
Yep.
So can you, with WinFS, can you write queries like stored procedures and store them in the operating system?
Yeah, so the question is, with WinFS, can you write a stored proc and store them in the OS? And the answer is kind of not really. I mean, let me put it this way. With WinFS, you create an item type. You develop a schema, and that schema has methods and stuff that you can associate with it. That's how you get stuff into the store. You don't walk up and create tables or create views per se. You define schemas, and those schemas then do the right things and implement things down the relational engine as necessary. So you'll be able to walk up and create and store procedures? Not exactly. Will you be able to have methods as part of your item definitions? You bet.
Okay, and then another question. What's the future of things like MSDE and even Active Directory with WinFS?
So I'm not prepared to talk about Active Directory on the server side, but on the client side, there's this effort going on. You'll see it in the PDC bits around identity services. So the notion of an authenticated user or a identified and authorized user that you can interact with in the Windows system is built, in fact, on WinFS. So we've done a marriage there between how users and accounts are dealt with within the operating system and how WinFS deals with contacts. With respect to AD and the server, too early to tell. In fact, we're not really talking much about the server in general right now because we're so early in planning. And the other question was?
Well, MSDE. I mean,
MSDE, right.
Would you ever even need it on Longhorn, I guess?
Yeah, the question is, will you ever need MSDE on Longhorn? And the answer is kind of a little bit complicated. Because WinFS is about this new data model, it's not true that you can just take an application that's been built on MSDE and just run it on Longhorn without installing MSDE. Because there really is a different data model there.
Well, sure,
so,
but if you
But our,
WinFS, could you use it to do everything?
absolutely. Spiritually, our goal is to ensure that the WinFS data model and the extensibility in the data model that's there allows you just to say, I'm just going to build this right on WinFS and not require MSDE.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Can you please speak to a question about capacity and performance and what your objectives are in that regard?
Capacity and performance, as much as possible.
Well,
Our
1 million records in a single folder and sorting that in a reasonable time for the UI on multiple keys, say.
Yeah, we're not really prepared to talk about specific numbers that we're after. But think about it, right? We talk about the whole genesis of WinFS being about all this digitally born data. And the fact that I now have in my own home 20,000 photographs, right, that I'd love to have annotations for, or other kinds of data, especially in the enterprise, that we know there's going to be huge volumes of data we have to deal with. So scalability is of utmost importance. In fact, part of the reason that we're so happy that we're doing WinFS at this particular point in history is that our NTFS system and our relational engine have gotten sophisticated enough to be able to handle the kinds of performance and scale that we need to have in not only just in the desktop, but also eventually in the server. So we don't have specific numbers yet. We'll probably have them by beta 1, what's within guidelines and whatever else. But the data model has been designed inherently around scalability.
When Active Directory was first introduced at a PDC, and we had discussions about what it was good for and what it wasn't good for.
Yep.
They were pretty clear about what it wasn't good for, and I didn't really get that from your discussion today. Can you sort of be more clear about don't use it for, like, I mean, the example might be, obviously, perhaps highly transactional store.
Well, we are a transacted store, in fact.
But,
I'll give you one example. I'm not going to suggest that IBM ports DB2 onto WinFS. That's kind of a joke. But the PDC is fundamentally not about trying to limit people's creativity. It's about trying to get people to think about what they can and can't do with the platform. As we take feedback in, right now the platform is very open. It's very, and I'm not going to call it loose, but it's very open to possibilities. And how we tune it over the next, however long it takes to release it, a couple of years, is going to be directly influenced by what we're hearing from developers around what they want to do with it and what they want to be capable of. So we're not really at the point of saying it's just going to be no good for this and no good for that, because we really are at a point where we want to have the possibilities there to inform what we are going to make it good at. I know it's kind of not the answer you're looking for, not as firm as you're looking for, but that really is the truth. We really are at a state where we want to have people thinking about what they can do with it, learn from that so that we can make it great for that. And yeah, we're going to prioritize things out, but we'll do that around beta time.
thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you give me an idea how this is going to be usable or in the future in an enterprise scenario? So having information stored in quite different locations, quite different types of systems, and integrating them back together in end-user applications and look like one WinFS store to them. Is that the idea, or is this still a one-machine technology?
No, it's not a one-machine technology. In fact, I think you'll learn about this in the API sessions, but if not, let me just say it here. The APIs directly can work across multiple WinFS stores. And in fact, the whole shell experience has to work across multiple WinFS stores. Not only because multiple of them may exist on any given Longhorn system, but because I may have data in my enterprise that's my everyday information that's out there on some server somewhere that I want to have included in my experience. So we are, in fact, designing around this, both the API and model layer and in the user experience layer. I had to cut questions off because I'm getting yelled at that the next thing needs to get set up and blah, blah, blah. We will be in the client lounge, which is right down the hall. And we'll take more and more and more questions now. We'll take more and more questions to Ask the Experts. I thank you for coming. You've been a great audience and very nice.